You're muted.
I would like to call to order the March 11th, 2024 regular school board meeting of Community Unit School District 303 at 6:01 p.m. Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll?
Yes, Mrs. Bell.
Here.
Mr. Kuschert.
Here.
Mr. Lackner.
Here.
Mr. Lentz.
Here.
Mrs. McCabe.
Here.
Mr. McNally.
Here.
Mrs. Fairgrieve.
Here. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, we will now move into section 2 of the agenda, beginning with the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mrs. Fairgrieve. Tonight, we have a number of students and staff with us to celebrate some incredible athletic accomplishments. So to kick off tonight's event will be Mr. Jim Richter, the principal of East High School.
Thank you and good evening. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to come here and celebrate yet another historic season by the STCE wrestling team. There was a lot of great things to celebrate both as a team and individually, and really the best person to speak to all of that would be head coach Jason Potter. So if Jason wants to come on up and introduce his team and tell you a little bit about their storied year. So Jason, come on up.
Why don't you guys come on up with me? Coaches too. Make it a little bit easier so you all made it. Yeah, face them. They're important. First off, thank you for having us, and thanks for recognizing our program and our guys on our team. This was a very fun year. We fell a little bit short of our ultimate goal of trying to defend the state championship again, but despite that, I'm extremely proud of these guys and the work that they had to put in, starting the year out on top. And it was different for our program to be the hunted for once. So that changed things for us and put a lot of pressure on these guys, and they rose to the occasion all year long. Came down to an amazing duel at the very end of the year with Mount Carmel, who ended up winning it. But the fight that these guys showed through that whole process was incredible. It says a lot to be getting a trophy and just in general, but the level of caliber in the state of Illinois in wrestling is extremely high. There's 4 teams in Illinois that were all ranked in the top 25. So we ended the year in 3rd, and we ended the year, I think, at like 23rd in the country is what they have us ranked at, and 18 of those 23 teams are all private schools. So for these guys to be in the top 5 of public schools in the country says a lot about them. So unfortunately, most of the team couldn't be here. We go pretty hard all year long, and this is the 2 weeks that we kind of give them a break and leave them alone. So they're kind of scattered off doing their own thing. But a couple of guys showed up tonight, so we'll start on the end. Yeah, Charlie. Yeah, they want to call you Charlie instead of Jack. That's his dad. I wrestle with him. This is Jack Miller, Liam I, Ben Davino, Caden Potter, Tyler Guerra, Jaden Colon, and Anthony Gutierrez all showed up. And then in the back, Joe Barzak, my brother Christopher Potter, and Colin Wilmington. So just a couple individual accomplishments in here too. Ben Davino was a 4-time state champ. So he ended his high school at 181-1, which is the best of any high school wrestler ever to come through Illinois. So that was pretty sweet. Anthony Gutierrez took 4th, and Jaden Colon won his 3rd state title as well. He's right behind him. Thank you again for having us. I appreciate it.
Coach Potter and team coaches, thank you for all that you do for our student athletes, for our students at East and across this district. I know the incredible amount of time and energy all of you coaches put into our students, and it's much appreciated. Athletes, student athletes, incredible. So impressive what you do and the commitment it takes to being top student athletes in D303. Thank you for what you do. Great job. Great job, team. Now, I'd like to bring up the athletic director from North High School, Mr. Joe Benoit. Woo-hoo.
Good evening. Honored to be here tonight to present our second place IHSA state finishers in our girls swim program. Coach Rooney won't mention this, but this is our ninth conference title, our fourth state trophy, and like I said, a second place finish overall. Pretty remarkable. Coach Rooney this past year was inducted into the Hall of Fame. This past month, he sported 3 different hairstyles himself. I don't know that this one's my favorite. I really liked the bleach blonde. But overall, this team gets it done not only in the water, but in the classroom as well, and in the hallways. It starts over the summer with our community lesson program, in which over 1,000 of our youth come through this program, led by the student athletes behind me. And when I say led by, they truly lead the lessons from start to finish. And the connections and the bonds that they make with our youth in this community is absolutely remarkable. And so it's very special to see the culture that has been created and manifested over the years come to fruition with big finishes at the state level. We could not be more proud of this group. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our Hall of Fame coach, Coach Rob Rooney.
I would like to thank you guys for having us here. It's an honor. I also want to recognize Jason, what he does for the community and how much he cares about his wrestling program. And not only the wrestlers, but the kids in this town. It's something to be recognized. I also want to give a shout out because his wife not only swam for me when she was younger, so it's kind of come full circle on many sides. I've been very fortunate to be in this town for a very long time and been coaching a lot of great kids, and the group behind me is not only unique, but their sights for the future are really mounting every day, and I'm excited for what the future is going to bring for this group. I'm going to recognize Martina. She has a gift for someone.
For Justin Attaway.
She's going to give Mr. Attaway a medal. You're going to go give it to him. You should put it around his neck. Public speaking, we're going to work on that too. Tess, you ready? Tess is a 2-time runner-up. This coming year, we're going to crack that next level. So Tess.
Come on. Amanda Stuber.
Next up, graduating and going to Youngstown State is Lulu Wolf.
Miss Christensen.
Next up is Holly Station, senior.
Mrs. Fairgrieve.
Next up, I'd like to recognize 3-time state champion Maya Townsend. I'd also like to recognize Julia over here, who's a multi-sport athlete, also on the track team. So she's with us as well. And then last is state champion Izzy Boo.
And my medal is for Dr. Gordon.
I also want to thank my coaches, Brian Mitchell and Andrew Lewarchek. It's awesome to have them aboard because they're both community members. Andrew's lifeline blood level came from St. Charles East and dove there, and now he's working at North, and it's an awesome thing to have him seeing both sides of the community. And his father obviously is involved with our program here in town to create the youth and bring it forward. So I want to thank all these kids behind me and thank you guys immensely. Thank you.
Coach Rooney, and
Next up to present the trophy to Commissioner Gordon, as we like to call him, Jenna Williams. Go. Or actually, you can come back this way. I found out who the real commissioner is.
never me. Stand with everybody. All right.
What am I standing
Yep.
behind that thing? Let's get right next to it. Why don't you help hold it? Stand right there.
All right. Outstanding.
I hope you didn't mind that one.
I loved it. I love it. Athletes, coaches, parents, thank you all. Thank you all for taking the time to come out, for the board, the community, to celebrate your incredible achievements throughout D303. Thank you for what you do, your commitment to our district and to your program and to each other. You're absolutely inspiring. Thank you for coming out tonight. You are more than welcome to stay, but we will not be hurt if you walk on out. Have a great night. All right. Scott, are you good with pictures and everything? You're okay. All right. So we're going to jump right into the rest of the superintendent's report. This is going to be focused on the elementary transition around our boundary changes. I'm going to ask teammates to come up and do a presentation on this. The board, at the conclusion of the boundary process, the board asked administration to bring forward what are those steps that you're all working on? What are we doing around this transition with this significant move of our elementary students? Roughly 21% of our elementary students are moving schools. So what is that plan that's in place tonight? We're going to share some of that work with you as we jump into this. And I believe Scott Harvey will kick us off. So Scott, to you.
Yes, thank you. All right. So as we embarked on our boundary communication plan last year, we were intentional about adhering to the strategic priorities set by our board, notably with respect to ensuring effective collaboration and culture of dignity. These were going to be very important communications with our families and have significant impacts. So therefore, we were methodical in how we engaged our families, as well as staff, and where we connected with them, as well as how often we communicated with them. The other strategic priority we'll be focused on tonight is instructional coherence during Dr. Igo's presentation on the dual language program. So communications on the boundary process began with the start of the school year, and there have been numerous updates along the way. This timeline actually reflects some of the key communications from each month leading up to today. And it started back in August when we shared our initial communications to families and staff on the changes ahead. Shortly thereafter, we launched what will become a very robust website where we stored all of our communications. It became an archival ground for us where we would store our family, staff, and community communications, as well as provide consistent updates on that page. This page is accessible on our district website as well as all of our school websites. Since the website launched, it has been viewed just over 60,000 times by more than 25,000 unique users. In total, the communications department shared more than 50 individual communications with families, staff, community members during this period. This included several electronic newsletters, press releases, physical mailers to our homes, as well as social media posts. So with boundaries for next year now approved, we are transitioning from district-wide communications to our school communications, where that's predominantly going to come from our principals and our human resources department as we engage with those families that have been impacted, as well as our staff. And along the way, of course, communications department will be there to assist as needed. So once the boundary maps were approved, our information technology department went to work on updating our interactive boundary maps. And that allows our families to easily plug in their address so that they can identify where their attendance zone will be. ID has been working with and updating our student database as well. And that allows our mass communications to be in a position to communicate with these new families for next year. I'm now going to turn this over to Audra.
Good evening. As of this afternoon, we've received 76 requests for transfer from the high school and middle school level. Those requests will be reviewed upon the closure date of March 31st with determination and communication to all families who've made requests by the third week of April. Also, all K-8 buildings are working off of a common template with an opportunity to personalize letters welcoming their new families. The contents of these letters will include information about the principal, the school community, resources, and upcoming school engagement opportunities that they will have. We acknowledge that each building is unique, especially with the amount of student change that they are experiencing. So each principal will personalize their message and the events to meet the needs of their school community. All letters will be sent from principals on the same date prior to spring break. And families will receive the welcome letters from the principals via electronic mail as well as US mail. In addition to that, we've notified all families who have students in specialized programming for next school year about their placement. Parents had the opportunity to engage in conversation with Student Services Administration to ask questions, and all new families will be included in the new student principal communications that will be going out prior to spring break. Throughout the spring, families and students will be invited to engage with the school principal as well as the school community through a range of events that will include things such as building tours, meet and greets, and PTO-sponsored social events. The dates and types of the events will be determined by each principal based on the needs of their school community as well as any other previously scheduled events that are taking place on their campus.
So as has been the tradition in the elementary schools, all of our families will have the opportunity to share information about their child with the building principal, specifically through the lens of what the building principal would want to know about their child as a learner, about social emotional components. These parent letters assist our building teams in creating class lists and doing teacher assignments. We'll be revising the prompts within the letter to allow parents to be more poignant in sharing potential impacts of the boundaries on the student. So the receiving school has had that ability to connect with parents and get kind of that firsthand account of, hey, these might be some things that we want to plan for or plan around, knowing that the student may or may not be more or less impacted from the transition itself. I've also had 2 collaborative engagement meetings with Mrs. Woodring and the Lincoln PTO as we are planning an end of year celebration for Lincoln Elementary School. Through this event, we're going to honor both current and past Lincoln students, staff, families, community members. And once a few final details are confirmed, communication will go out to a wide audience. Also, when we look forward to middle of May, that is when our window, May 15th to be specific, opens up for our elementary inter-district transfer. And that window does stay open a little longer. It stays open until July 1st. Determinations of the inter-district transfer decisions will be made no later than 3 weeks prior to the first day of school. All K-8 schools will host a variety of events in late July and August to welcome our students and families back to school. Based on level, events may include Backpack Night, which is an evening event for students and families prior to the first attendance day, new student orientations, material pickup days, and other PTO-sponsored school community events. Additionally, special considerations are being made for opening celebrations for early childhood at the Haynes Center, Fox Ridge Elementary School, and the transition program at Lincoln. Sorry, I'm figuring out where to point the clicker.
So much better.
Thank you.
On top of communicating with parents, we have been communicating with our educators and our staff about the transitions for next year. In the fall, we had a webinar that was involving HR and business office information. We were talking about budget, and we were talking about the transfer process and the RIF process with all of our staff, because there were 2 different things that were going to be happening this spring. And so we wanted to make sure that staff were clear about the difference between the RIF process and the transfer process. So this discussion has really started back in October. And at that time, we informed staff that the March-April timeframe would be when the transfer process would begin. And so we are holding to that timeline. In January, HR met with the SEA and SEESP union presidents to plan for the involuntary transfer process for Lincoln, Davis, and Richmond. And then in mid-February, we shared a survey with all the staff from those 3 sites to get their input as to their request for involuntary transfer, if they wanted to stay in their grade level, they wanted to stay in their building, if they wanted to go to a different building, or if they just wanted the involuntary transfer process as a whole. What was their preference? And so we sent that out for SCEA and SCESP staff. And then we also have the voluntary transfer request, which that is a contractual piece for SCEA, and people were able to request that by March 1st. So now we are currently in the process. That's what I was doing all day today, was working on the involuntary transfer process and looking at where people have asked for the transfers, where it fits. And then we will be starting to communicate that to staff before spring break. So we're hoping that all the involuntary transfer process will be completed before spring break. And after that, then the voluntary transfer process really kicks in, where people will then be able to select positions that are open in the district. Now I'm going to hand this over to Christine, Dr. Igo.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the Richmond Dual Language Program. You might remember back at the January 9th Board of Ed meeting, we presented the report on improving student achievement for our students that were multilingual, as well as our Hispanic students. In this report, it was a comprehensive report that really looked at all of the places and all of the ways in which we support or are going to look towards a continuous improvement for our multilingual learners. It included our dual language, but it was kind of wrapped in all that information. There have been a couple of questions about our dual language and how are we planning and what does that look like? So we thought tonight would be a good opportunity to kind of pull some of that information out, kind of lay out for you what are the plans and how are we doing that work. This is a slide you've seen before. It kind of highlights how we come about and how we work towards that continuous improvement overall. This is what we're doing and how we are working towards that alignment within our strategic plan. We know that when all of these components are solidly in place, student achievement improves for each and every student. Conversely, we know when these components are not in place, particularly for our multilingual students or other students who have been historically marginalized, it is very detrimental and they feel the impact greater than other students. What's probably the most important thing to recognize here is that it is not one strategy or one program that really talks or creates that change. It's really how we leverage each of these and how we support them to work interdependently so that we're working as one system to move and improve student learning over time. This slide was also in a presentation that we gave on the 18th. And this was really our improvement strategy. And these were the 5 levers that we kind of walked through and how are we going to kind of pull on each of these to improve our learning for everyone. At the core of this strategy really is the idea that we set high rigorous standards for every single student, and then we differentiate how we respond to that student and those needs. And the dual language program is a way that we differentiate our response to support students. During that report, we talked a lot about that family engagement piece. And we talked there that we made a recommendation that we had a family community liaison coordinator, one that could really help our families make connections to our outside community resources, as well as work to ensure ongoing engagement with our families. While our goal is to transition from a one-way program to a two-way program, while we are in the process of slowly making that transition, we will still have students that are enrolled in our one-way program. And we felt it was really important that in that program that we were thinking about and we were talking about how to revise and refine the services and the things that we provide. In here, you'll see that I started and I kind of outlined for you the program design. What are we doing and how are we aligning our current one-way program with those evidence-based strategies, as well as what are we doing to implement kind of that rigorous core instruction that we had kind of talked about. There's really 2 things that I want to point out here that might be different or that are kind of a highlight for how we're doing things. One is that we are looking to reevaluate our administrative staffing to assign an assistant principal to kind of oversee dual language. And the purpose of that would be really to provide that on-site in the moment support for our dual language program to ensure that those design features that we put in place, those evidence-based features, are being implemented. And when not, we can quickly identify what those barriers are and begin to problem solve around them. The second one really is the idea of leveraging the expertise of everyone within our buildings to really talk through and enhance our instructional practices. This is something that we've already started to do. And matter of fact, we had a meeting today where we were sitting down and saying, so what's working, what's not, where do we go, what's our next step? But again, it's really this idea that everybody in the building is collectively responsible for the learning of all of our students. And what can we do to continue to clarify and provide that embedded coaching on instructional strategies. In particular, we're working on some instructional routines so that we're reducing that cognitive load for kids, giving them an opportunity to really engage with content. As we prepare for transitioning to that two-way program, we need to collaboratively build a program that's responsive to our student needs and the desires of our community. An important aspect of moving to this two-way dual language program is remembering that we're not necessarily creating a completely new program. We're not looking to increase sections or increase teachers. Right, what we will be doing is we will be taking our current courses and our current sections and identifying English dominant students to join that section. We will be adding those students beginning with kindergarten during the 25-26 school year. This slide really just highlights some of the steps. This is in the report as well as in the presentation we provided back in January. We broke them down, provided a little bit more detail, and then gave some anticipated timelines. Like all things, our goal is to hit these, but as we begin the work, we may find that there are barriers that we need to change, move, or kind of work around. And then finally, really wanted to highlight that supportive learning environment. And regardless of whether it's a one-way or a two-way program, these are things that we need to continue to refine. And you'll see that these are ongoing supports that we're continuing to put in place, but really implemented on making sure we've got those core components of continuous improvement ready to roll, that we are thinking about those social cultural supports and we're embedding them in the things that we do, that we're building the capacity of our educators to develop biliteracy and bilingualism, as well as to implement the dignity framework, including some of our trauma-informed practices. So those are ongoing because they're foundational to the work that we do. That kind of concludes our update, and we're certainly happy to answer any questions you may have.
I have a couple questions. Could you go into a little more detail about extending it to 6 through 8, the grade, and because that looks like it starts next year, and if you could do that, and then just a little bit more information about the role the assistant principal will do as a dual language focus versus what we tend to think assistant principals do.
Absolutely. So that 6-8, so you might remember in our report, one of the things we talked about is when we originally built our dual language program, we only built it through elementary, and research tells us when we do one way, it takes 6 to 8 years. And so what we need to do is we need to extend those opportunities into middle school. And that is, we had presented a while back in regards to that Spanish language arts course that we're going to be adding, and then adding that from 6th grade, and we'll roll that up kind of over time. So that is really where we've kind of put our time. That's what that means, is that we're looking to make sure we've advanced that support into middle school. And really the advanced support in the research tells us we need 2 courses. So we currently have social studies, and then this Spanish language arts provides us with that 2nd course, which extends that programming as the length of time that we need to bring the biliteracy that we want. And then you asked about the assistant principal. And so what it will look probably fairly similar in regards to how we might think of a traditional assistant principal. If you think about from a high school lens, it's not uncommon for us to have an AP of instruction or an AP of college and career readiness. Same idea. The focus really will be on being an expert and being able to support the dual language program. So they'll participate with us through learning and teaching to have the supports that they need to understand the design, to help teachers implement, be right there on the ground, able to help them implement, but ultimately reports to the building principal, because ultimately the building principal needs to be responsible and make sure we've got all the pieces in place.
Will the assistant principal be responsible for will paperwork, grant, or will
that will continue to be at the director of language acquisition level. Thank you. I'm sorry, didn't catch that the first time.
How close are we to finalizing the staffing plan for Richmond in general? Like, is that when will we expect that back to the board, right? Because I don't want to trickle we have our community liaison, we have the assistant principal, with the language. At what point will you guys feel comfortable that it'll be finalized for next year?
We feel pretty comfortable with these 2 additions. We have to work through the process Marcy spoke about earlier on staffing side of things, but additional support for Richmond. These are the 2 support structures that we feel like are most critical to moving Richmond to the place we want it to be that dual language school, to be the school that we all envision it to be.
And then just a point of clarification here for the resources to support through middle school. Will that be at both middle schools, Dr. Igo?
It is currently scheduled just to be at Thompson.
Thank you.
How will administration ensure that families outside of the boundaries of Richmond are knowledgeable about the availability and the benefits of the one-way dual language program that's delivered at Richmond?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the pieces that we're going to do, one of the things you noted in there is January of the following year will be into our formal recruiting process. But one of the things that we need to do is really make sure that our community's aware of the dual language program in our district, because I think that was one of the learnings that we had going through this process, where how many people had no idea that D303 for over 10 years has a dual language program within our district. So for us, it is that constant communication out there, and also finding different opportunities to make sure that the families have access to Richmond. One of those ideas is transportation, because we know that's always a barrier. It is offering transportation for families who are raising their hand to saying, native English speaker, but I want to be a part of the dual language program, and offering those. But a significant more communication around dual language as we go through the community process, as we bring this together, making sure our community understands what it is and the availability to when they can access dual language will be a big piece of learning, teaching, Scott Harvey on the communication front. And at this table, we have to do a better job than what's been done in the past, is recognizing we do have this program, and highlighting the work that our students are doing and the success that our kids can see through this program. Dr. Igo?
I believe you're asking about the one-way program.
I'm talking about 24-25.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
first.
just wanted to clarify.
For the kindergarten.
No, means
No,
net.
I mean,
Oh, I
everybody
apologize
who's
for that one.
available to participate in the dual language program that will exist in 24-25 at Richmond. I want to know how we're going to ensure that we have the biggest and widest net cast, so that the most families are aware of the benefits of that central site program and have the opportunity to say, yes, I'd like to participate, or no, I choose not to participate.
Yeah, so part of the work that we've been working through right now is really rethinking what is our program criteria, what is our placement process, and then how and do we communicate that with families. And so our current programming, or our current process for doing that, we absolutely value parent input, and the parents ultimately give us consent, but really making sure that we're very clear about when a student is eligible for the program, indicating that we are recommending this particular program, and then making sure that we're explaining our why. And when you need to, again, that'll be as people come in, because it's not a program that you can enter into, as we've talked about, in the middle of third grade or fourth grade if you haven't already had that program. But we are definitely cleaning up that process and getting very clear about how do we invite people in, and how do we make sure people know and understand the benefits of that program when we're making those recommendations. Can I answer your question?
Yeah, I was just looking back to the earlier part of the presentation around school engagement, and I would encourage administration to go back and look at the timeline associated with that school engagement process that you'll already go through, given the boundary changes, and see if there's opportunity to include discussions and information about the Richmond dual language program within those communications. We're going to be reaching out to all the families. There's all kinds of change in play. It's a real opportunity to talk about the benefits of that central site dual language program.
Absolutely.
I have a question. Did we consider at all for the formal recruitment of the kindergarten when we moved to two-way dual language? Is there an opportunity to also give that opportunity to first grade? I don't know from an academic standpoint.
Yeah, based upon the research that I've done, but I do think that we'll get that opportunity to dig in a little bit deeper, as we start that work. It's really not a good idea, because we need to build that base in kindergarten. So we would have kids walking in that hadn't had any exposure to Spanish in kindergarten. And so when we start to talk about what does that allocation look like in terms of language, and making sure kids have those opportunities to engage in both languages, it might be problematic. But it's definitely something we will look into and just double check to make sure that there isn't something out there I missed. But that was just kind of in my general kind of look.
Okay.
at the research.
That's fair. The other question I had, we've had a lot of discussion about, the very high percentage of free and reduced lunch students. Let's talk about at Richmond in particular. So is there still an opportunity to bring forward things that aren't covered in here that we should be doing to address that population that are not
In here.
necessarily dual language? Yeah.
Absolutely. And so some of the things are going to like fall over into that supportive learning environment, but some of the things that we will be bringing forward and talking through really has to do with how are we setting up and thinking about the entire environment for students, and then also spending some time talking about then what does that mean for our instructional practice. So we know that when students have been experienced, if they live in that poverty, that they have chronic stress, which then kind of has your brain, rewires your brain. So what is it that we put in place? So some of the just general ideas and things that we'll be talking through really will start with how do we set things up? Knowing that we have students who are going to live in that fight or flight response, how do we build consistency? How do we build routines? How do we use instructional routines consistently so that we're reducing cognitive load, increasing predictability? But really the key is about how do we build the entire system to think about and respond to students. So we've got some things in place in terms of making sure that we've provided all of the appropriate professional learning to help students. So we set it up for success. I don't know if I answered your question.
You did, other than, so you'll be able to bring that back to the board.
Yeah,
at
we'll
some
put
point,
all
that
those pieces
strategy?
together. Yeah.
When are you shooting to have a strategy in place that then you just need to execute?
We're currently building that right now. We have it on the calendar, I think, to come back maybe in May or June to L&T, where we'd have all the pieces put together.
Okay, thank you.
One quick question: when the two-way dual language becomes what we're doing in D303, if we had a transfer student or a student that moved into the district, would there be, once this is in place, would there be a way to test those incoming students so we could put them in there if they were at that level?
Yeah, so that becomes a careful balance because they have to have had exposure to both Spanish and English, regardless of what they move in, that they've had that exposure. They've had instruction in both of those languages, and so therefore they're prepared to walk into the classroom and participate. So we will absolutely test students and make sure that and if they have those skills, but they generally have to come from a dual language program.
That's what I was thinking. If a student moves in from another district in another state or wherever that also has a similar program, would we have a mechanism for testing that to make sure that they are actually up to speed? Because we do have a high level of rigor here. I want to make sure, not that we're keeping any students out, but that we aren't either putting them over their head or not including them in an opportunity that they would be ready for.
Right. Well, we absolutely, that program needs to exist somewhere else. And it's not about keeping students out, but it's about making sure that they have the skills in order to be successful, because the expectation will be that they're reading and writing in both languages.
Right. That's what I was meaning to say, probably not in the right way, but just to make sure that we have some sort of testing mechanism in place for students on the off chance students do move in with that skill set. Cool. Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those updates. And now we're moving to item C in section 2. So a board member report on committee meetings. Can we start with business services?
Sure, we can do that. Business services met on February 26th, and in the discussion, we covered the January financial report for Mid-Valley. There were no issues reported there. We had a discussion of the January financial report for D303. We had a deeper discussion associated with the transitioning of district vehicles to enterprise managed service around fleet administration, and you'll see an action item associated with that on tonight's agenda. We had a discussion about the Cranston Meadows vacant land and the opportunity to sell that unusable portion of land to the St. Charles Park District. That's on the agenda tonight as well. We had a further discussion associated with a program on academic return on investment that brings together analysis associated with the efficacy of programs that L&T puts in place and the cost of those programs. You'll see that in the consent agenda today. There's a training program for all of the administration to participate in. We had a construction update. We had a discussion associated with construction change orders. There's an action item associated with those change orders and the management of change orders on today's agenda. We had a discussion associated with the district-wide air conditioning improvement plan. There's an action item associated with that as well. We also had some further conversation about the North High School auditorium lighting controls, some drain trench replacement in the transportation, a playground improvement for the Haynes Early Childhood Center, and those show up on the consent agenda. Dr. Gordon shared a superintendent's report, and we closed at 6:14.
Thank you for that update, Mr. Lackner. Learning and Teaching Committee.
Okay, sure thing. So learning and teaching met back on February 20th at 5:30 p.m. Reminder to everybody that all of the recordings are available on the district's YouTube channel. We had some really good discussion regarding the PLC, so we got a nice update, continued discussion, I should say, on the professional learning communities, and notably we discussed teaching behaviors and evidence-based practices. We discussed educator engagement to enhance said practices, and then also the collective responsibility for each student's learning kind of across the board. There's also a video there, a really nice video that folks can look at if they didn't see the meeting in person, discussing the PLC work and how it's impacting educators and students. It was a really great video. The next thing we discussed was the Eureka Math Squared resource. We've been using Eureka Math since 2017 in the district, and I believe there were 4 pilots, Dr. Igo, isn't that correct? So we're now going to be moving that district-wide, K through 5, starting in 2024. We'll need some new resources, which I believe is on consent agenda for this evening. And then lastly, we had a really nice discussion regarding the Student Achievement Report update. This, as everyone knows, is ongoing from the November discussion that we have each year. A couple of the points that we discussed were the on-track indicators, sense of belonging data, ELA and Math iReady scores. We also had a bit of a discussion and clarification regarding what stretch growth means, and as well as ELA and Math at the high school levels. Our next meeting, I believe, is next Monday, March 18th at 5:30 p.m. We'll be discussing some curriculum renewals, summer school update, and then STEM, which was formerly Empower. So that will be a wonderful meeting that you will not want to miss.
Thank you, Mr. Kuchar. Next, we will move to our citizen comments.
Oh,
and
we also had safety committee
okay,
for the first time in a while on February 27th. We got some updates on our access control projects, as well as updates from administration on the ALICE training and the planned rollout for staff and students. Very brief agenda, but.
okay, thank you for that, Mr. Lentz. Any other updates? Okay. All right, let's move to citizen comments then. We do have a citizen comment, Mr. Lackner.
During the public comment period, members of the public body who wish to speak are asked to first state their name and the community in which they reside. Each individual will have up to 3 minutes to address the board on a topic of their choosing. We ask all individuals who address the board to do so with respect and civility toward others. Please note that personnel matters are sensitive and confidential. We also want to inform our speakers that all regular, special, and committee meetings are live streamed and available for viewing at any time on the district's YouTube channel. Personal information should be considered before making a statement that will be recorded and made public. While the board will not respond in today's public comment during this meeting, we are committed to listening to you to help support our work for the district and on behalf of our students, families, staff, and community members.
Thank you, Mr. Lackner. I would like to ask Ms. Terry McCann-Mikowski to come forward.
Hello, I am Terry McCann-Mahalski, and I am a member of the St. Charles community. I have 2 students who attend Red Lane Middle School. And I would like to talk to you today about the school discipline policy and how it is applied to students who have 504s, IEPs, or those who may have needs, and to ensure that it is applied without discriminatory policies or that it's applied equitably across the board. I've noticed that on paper, our policy looks fantastic. However, I've also noticed that it doesn't really mention 504s in our policy. It does mention IDEA, and it does mention students with IEPs, mentions that we have a multi-tiered support system, but it leaves out students with 504s. And I've also noticed in dealing with elementary school and with the middle school that students with 504s are often ignored, that they are often not given the same notice or importance as students who have IEPs. I know it's not done on purpose. I know that students with IEPs do have greater legal protections than students with 504s. However, the ADA does require that students who have 504s are not discriminated against as well. And I would just like us to keep in mind that when we are looking at our school discipline policies, that we take into account mitigating circumstances such as what those students' disabilities are, especially if the school has been notified of what those disabilities are when they are disciplining students, and to make sure that they do not go overboard with discipline. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, next we will move to the consent agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda items 4A through 4O?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. McNally, Mr. Kuschert for the second. Is there any discussion at this time? Okay, Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll call vote?
Yes, Mr. Kuschert,
Yes.
Mr. Lackner,
Yes.
Mr. Lentz,
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Speargreave.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. Moving to section 5 on the agenda, which is for action. Item A is a memorandum of understanding with the SCEA. Can I have a motion to approve the memorandum of understanding with the SCEA?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Lentz and Mrs. McCabe for the second. Is there any discussion or questions at this time? Okay, Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll call vote?
Mr. Lackner,
Yes.
Mr. Lentz,
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Kuschert,
Yes.
Mrs. Speargreave.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. Item B is a resolution for the non-renewal or dismissal of temporary teachers. Can I have a motion to approve that this school board adopt the resolution before you authorizing and directing the president and secretary to give to the temporary licensed employees listed on the resolution written notice of this board's decision to not reemploy said licensed employees for the 2024 to 2025 school year, and in view of the fact that the resolution form in front of you is the same for these temporary licensed employees, I recommend we adopt this like resolution.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Bell and Mr. Lentz for the second. Is there any discussion or questions at this time? Okay, Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll call vote?
Mr. Lentz,
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Kuschert,
Yes.
Mr. Lackner,
Yes.
Mrs. Speargreave.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. Item C on the agenda, honorable dismissal of teachers, reduction in force. Can I have a motion to approve the resolution authorizing the honorable dismissal of teachers? This resolution will honorably dismiss the following teachers from employment in the district at the end of the current school year for the following reason: to decrease the number of teachers employed. The teachers are Christopher Potter and Ashley Zima.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Lentz. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Lackner. Any discussion or questions at this time? Okay, Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll call vote?
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Kuschert,
Yes.
Mr. Lackner,
Yes.
Mr. Lentz,
Yes.
Mrs. Peregrine.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. Item D on the agenda is a resolution to honorably dismiss selected non-licensed employees at the close of the current school term. Can I have a motion that this Board of Education adopt the resolution before you, authorizing and directing the President and Secretary to give to the selected non-licensed employees listed on Exhibit 1 attached hereto written notice of this board's decision to honorably dismiss said personnel effective as of the end of the 2023-2024 school term, and in view of the fact that resolution form in front of you is the same for these selected non-licensed employees, I recommend we adopt this like resolution.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Lentz and Mr. Kuschert for the second. Is there any discussion or questions at this time? Okay, Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll call vote?
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Kuschert,
Yes.
Mr. Lackner,
Yes.
Mr. Lentz,
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mrs. Peregrine.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. Item E on the agenda is fleet vehicles. Can I have a motion to approve the contract with Enterprise Fleet and authorize the acquisition of 6 driver education vehicles and 13 special education minivans, and authorize administration to sign any necessary documents?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. McNally and Mr. Kuschert for the second. Is there any discussion at this time? Okay, Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll call vote?
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Kuschert,
Yes.
Mr. Lackner,
Yes.
Mr. Lentz,
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Mrs. Peregrine.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. The next item on the agenda is Cranston Meadows vacant land. Can I have a motion to approve the resolution and purchase agreement with the St. Charles Park District for the sale of the 2 vacant parcels next to Cranston Meadows Park?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Lentz and Mr. McNally for the second. Is there any discussion at this time? Okay, Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll call vote?
Mr. Kuschert,
Yes.
Mr. Lackner,
Yes.
Mr. Lentz,
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Peregrine.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. Item G on the agenda is a resolution delegating authority to approve change orders for the Haynes Center and Lincoln School facilities projects. Can I have a motion to approve the resolution delegating authority to approve change orders for the Haynes Center and Lincoln School facilities?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Lentz for the first and Mr. Kuschert for the second. Is there any discussion or questions at this time?
I'd just like to make sure that we are alerting the public as to the changes that have taken place in some of the scope of construction based on the change in plans for some of the buildings.
So is that a question directed to Mr. Attaway or?
Just a statement.
Okay.
I'd like to make a couple of comments. I appreciate the necessity of rapid response to changes in construction. and that construction always entails some surprises. I see some of the controls embedded in the resolution that ensure that one, admin informs the board of those changes, two, that the total budget remains within the overall construction budget that the board has approved. I further appreciate that the resolution was amended since the business services meeting to eliminate the time delay. Those are all really positive things. At the same time, I'm going to vote against the resolution. And the reason I'll do so is that the total dollar volume is quite a lot. It's the kind of dollar volume that would show up in a for action item. And so in spite of the fact that it's going to require additional work on the board from the board in order to respond rapidly to those changes, I've decided to vote against that resolution.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lackner, for those comments. Looks like Mrs. McCabe.
I'm going to vote no for the same types of reasons. It puts a responsibility on the board to act quickly and not let construction hold up. But I am concerned again about the amount. And I also am concerned because of previous construction problems that we bumped into in past projects that the board needs to be more involved early on. So at this point in time, I'm planning to vote no.
I feel I'm about into that same headspace as Mr. Lackner and Mrs. McCabe. I feel that if the board is going to approve something like this, I feel it's incumbent upon us to come back quickly. And I don't think that's a lot to ask of us. I think we can do that because I think it's a large enough amount that it makes me a little bit uneasy with just granting that due to some of the ways construction funding has been spent in the past. And that is not a reflection of my judgment on how the administration handles things. That's a prior thing as a parent that I watched, and I felt we just spent way too much on construction and I wasn't clear where it was going as a community member. And so I think it makes more sense to do that at the board table.
Okay. Anyone else at this time? Okay. Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll call vote?
Mr. Lackner,
No.
Mr. Lentz,
No.
Mrs. McCabe,
No.
Mr. McNally,
No.
Mrs. Bell,
No.
Mr. Kuchert,
No.
Mrs. Fairgrave.
No. Motion does not pass. 0 yes and 7 no. Moving to item H, which is district-wide air conditioning phase 1. Can I have a motion to approve the district-wide air conditioning improvements phase 1?
So moved. Second.
Thank you, Mr. Lentz, and the second from Mr. Lackner. Is there any discussion at this time? Okay. Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll call vote?
Mr. Lentz,
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Kuchert,
Yes.
Mr. Lackner,
Yes.
Mrs. Fairgrave.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. Moving on to section 6 on the agenda, which is for information. We have our standard informational items that were in your packet and available for the community. The D303 financial report, our Mid-Valley financial report, Freedom of Information Act requests, and our district enrollment. Moving to section 7, new business. Would any board member like to introduce any new business items at this time? Okay. Do we have any citizen comments? Okay, there are no citizen comments at this time. So may I have a motion to adjourn the March 11th, 2024 D303 school board meeting?
So moved.
Thank you,
Second.
Mr. Lentz, and thank you, Mr. McNally, for the second. Ms. Marsan, would you please take a roll call vote?
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Kuchert,
Yes.
Mr. Lackner,
Yes.
Mr. Lentz,
Yes.
Mrs. Fairgrave.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. The meeting is adjourned at 7:05 p.m.